Hi, my name is CJ and this is my RC channel. In this video, I'm going to be analyzing some race video, discussing the problems I see and showing you what parts I'm changing to correct the problems. First, let's look at a couple of turns to see how the suspension is acting or reacting, and it's pretty bad. See how the truck is leaning hard to the right as the turn to the left is initiated, and see how this extreme lean angle is even more pronounced in the rear. Then the truck straightens and begins setting up for a left turn. It rolls back to center and beyond, leaning hard to the left. Also notice that as the truck completes both turns, there's a tendency to sliding the rear. This is oversteer. We are going to see a lot more of that. Let's watch a couple of laps. Here we can see that there is a lot of off-throttle oversteer. I'm having to drive to the problems by letting the truck slide around the corner and then shooting it down the next straight and sliding the next corner and so on. This is not a good solution because the truck is constantly on the edge of control and frequently out of control altogether. This wallowing of the suspension combined with an imbalance that creates oversteer can make the truck very hard to control. The extreme shifting of weight can induce oversteer on its own, but there is more likely an oversteer condition in addition to the wallowing, making the situation even worse. At the end of the first lap, I loop it in the sweeper at the end of the back straight. This is a graphic example of off-throttle oversteer. This condition may be aggravated by too much drag brake. Even a little bit of drag brake, when combined with this much instability, can cause a vehicle to loop. The inside rear tire is unweighted, so it has very little traction, if any. And when the drag brake or even just the motor winding down off throttle slows the outside rear tire, there is a loss of traction and the truck spins out. If we watch these laps again in slow motion, we can see just how unstable the truck is. There are a variety of issues that are conspiring to create this almost undrivable condition. In fact, the truck is so unstable that I had to revert to a point-and-shoot driving style like you might see in off-road two-wheel drive buggies, where you slide the turn, pick a straight line, and hit the throttle. See how I'm cutting a straight line through this lazy S-turn? I'm trying to avoid body roll so I have control going into the right turn following the S. That shows you just how bad the roll is and how unstable it makes the truck. This wallowing effect doesn't just affect turns, it also affects acceleration and braking. Watch as I accelerate down the back straight. The back end squats while the front end rises. The front end stays high most of the way down the back straight. This lets a lot of air in under the body, letting it act like a parachute. And that sudden weight transfer to the rear makes the front end hard to control. Under off-throttle deceleration and braking, we get the reverse effect, making the rear end hard to control. So what do I need to do to fix the problems? Number one, the suspension is way too soft. Number two, lowering the ride height even more may help the extreme weight transfers. Number three, I've got the wrong tires for this level of racing. Number four, I need to retune the suspension to try to reduce the oversteer effect. So in the second half of this video, I'm going to go over various parts that I am swapping out, things I am adding, and a set of shocks that I'm going to try. little bit of a spoiler here, those shocks don't solve the problem, unfortunately, so I cannot recommend you buying them for this vehicle. What I came to realize as I tried several different sets of shocks, a great variety of springs, some of the stiffest springs I could get for shock absorbers of this size and diameter and class of vehicle, I came to realize that the 1/10 scale four-wheel drive vehicles are far more in line with 1/8 scale cars than 10 scale cars. Even though they are technically 1/10 scale, the weight of the drivetrain, all the extra bearings and gears and drive shafts for all-wheel drive, the heavier chassis, all of that combines together to make a vehicle that just can't be controlled well in an on-road conditions by 1/10 scale shock absorbers. They're just not going to do it. Off-road, still probably just fine, but I end up going with something different, and I'm not going to tell you what that is now. Watch the rest of this video, and in the following video to come, you will see how I finally nail all this down and end up with a decent handling vehicle. But there's a lot of really good info in the rest of this video, so don't stop watching. I'm running a fairly aggressive gear ratio, I guess you could say. I'm running the 54 tooth and spur gear and a like a 13 tooth pinion. I'm probably going to take that down to an 11. I'm trying to basically get this geared so that the motor's hitting its high end at the end of the longest straightaway, which is ideally the way you want to set up gear ratios. You want to be maxing out that motor's power potential, and you also want as much acceleration out of turns and on the short straights as you can. So gearing for maximum speed, if that max speed is beyond what you can achieve in the space that the track allows on its longest straightaway, is just a waste. You're wasting power, you're wasting battery, and you're losing out on a lot of torque and acceleration that you could otherwise be having with a different gear ratio. So anyway, changes. I'm going to be getting rid of these tires. They work pretty good, but I did roll a couple of times in a couple of the heats, and wasn't real happy about that. This is a conversion kit for 17mm hexes. It is ST1654-17BK. The BK stands for black. It is available in other colors. It's ST Racing Concepts, or you can go to teamstrc.com, or you can search for this on Amazon. I don't remember the price offhand. It wasn't excessive. But what this is going to do is put this adapter onto each of the outdrives, and that will allow me to run these, which is a very nice set of 1/8 scale road car GT tires. And this is, I think, an ultra soft compound. They're already glued. I love the way they give you stickers so you can see your compound and such. It's a little more unsprung weight, but I'm not really worried about that. That little bit of unsprung weight, excuse me, is about as low as you can put it on the vehicle because it's on the center line of the axle. So That is, in effect, lowering the CG or adding weight to the lower end of the center of gravity. So I'm going to be running a real road car spec tire, and I'm also going to be making a few other changes. Now, these are all RPM parts for the suspension. I'm going to swap out the swing arms front and rear, and these are stiffer, so there's going to be less flex, which it didn't seem to be a huge problem, but you could kind of tell that the suspension had a lot of flex in it, a lot of mush. And although I will be replacing those nice anodized aluminum parts, the rear hubs, because they're made of metal and not a plastic, the holes for the bearings have to be machined with enough of a tolerance that you know, the average bearing is going to fit, which means that you get this. If you can see this, let me move this more into the way of the camera. Okay, watch. I'm just rocking the tire back and forth. Now that's ridiculous. That is a tremendous change in toe. And if you do the same thing top and bottom, that is a tremendous amount of camber flexibility. So in other words, there's no real way to know if you've got your car tuned correctly. 1 minute it's a -1 degree. The next time you put the gauge on it, it's +1 degree or 0. So that's a problem. And the nice thing about the RPMs pieces here, they are specifically designed such that you have to kind of press the bearings in a little bit. They're tight, and it reduces or eliminates as much of that rear play as possible. And the same thing that's going on back there is also going on up front, because we have the same type of metal parts up there. And when you are doing metal to metal, you have to design with tolerances that unfortunately allow for flexibility, or you cannot guarantee that parts are going to fit together. So again, going plastic up front using the RPM parts, they're not going to be as strong as aluminum, but I'm not jumping this thing off buildings. I'm racing it on a road course. And I'd rather have the precision of a good tight setup than unbreakable strength. I'll settle for very hard to break strength, and they're inexpensive. I have to replace them at some point because they bust, so be it. I am also going to swap out the Proline shocks, which I'm not unhappy with. They're not the highest quality shock absorber, and compared to what I am replacing them with, they are overpriced. Gotta say it. Like Proline products, and I may be using these again in the future. I'll probably definitely be using them on one car or another, but they're overpriced. Anyway, I am replacing them with these two shock sets. These are the currently available shocks that are being run on the TLR's newest 1/10 scale 4-wheel drive buggy. It's a 42 millimeter rear, 36.5. That does not speak to travel specifically. What that is the actual physical height of the shock body itself, not the interior stroke of the piston or anything like that. It's just the physical size of this item here in length. Okay, so I'm going to build those up. I'm going to be using another kit of the J Concepts shock bushings that are designed to lower the car by reducing overall travel. I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum, but I want the car to sit lower than it is at the moment with the current shock setup I have. As far as the lean issue goes, with the car wanting to squat and lift the front end, I'm probably going to have to live with a little bit of that, but I'm going to try to reduce it a bit by doing a couple of things. I'm going to be using some slightly stronger shock fluid. I'm using the 600 and the 500, 6 in the rear, 500 in the front, to try to calm down the motion and the sudden rolling of the vehicle, because it does, even with the hardest of the Traxxas anti-sway bars, and even with them dialed to a fairly stiff setting, they are still, you know, the truck is still wallowing a good bit. And I'd like to dial that back. So I'm going to try some thicker shock oil. As these compare to the more conventional numbers, these are between a 40 and a 60. Is that right? Let me just check my chart over here. Yeah, between 40 and 50 weight. So I'll be doing the lighter oil at the front to try to tighten that down a little bit. I'm going from I've got 37.5 at all four corners in these shock absorbers. Now, again, this isn't going to be an exact, because I'm not using the same shock absorber, so the pistons may have less pass-through, because it's a higher precision shock absorber. There may be less slippage around the piston, not to mention the difference in the size of the holes that I don't know what that is. So I'm just kind of, you know, again, I'm throwing stuff at the wall because I'm making multiple changes, but this is kind of my guesstimate. And I'm going to do the even heavier 600, which is equivalent to 50 weight, in the rear, to again try to keep this thing from squatting so hard. I'm going to tinker with some other settings, see if I can't get some anti-squat going. I'll see what I can come up with there, play with roll center, etc. But let me give you the parts numbers on these. The rear shocks are the TLR 233045, and 233044 is the front shock part. These are available as 2 packages. You don't have to buy up the shocks piece by piece. They are a far superior shock absorber, and I will show you how and why that is. It's not something for debate. It is simple fact. Okay, and they are less expensive. It's about $40 a pair versus at least $50 a pair for the Pro lines. So I would go with the TLRs, and I am. Also, the fact that they are a little shorter in general is going to be, you know, a factor as well. If you look at the shock body height, they are at least 4 millimeters shorter, more like 5 when you consider the difference in this area of the shock absorber. Now, why is this a superior shock absorber? Okay, I talked about this during an earlier video when I was building these up. And hopefully you've been following this. If you haven't, feel free to go back and watch that video at your leisure, or videos. I'm trying to give you guys a lot of information in this series on slashes, trucks, converting vehicles, like converting a truck to on-road racing, an off-road truck to on-road, things of that nature. So even if you've got a decent amount of experience, you may hear some things, see some things that give you food for thought, ideas, or possibly even information you did not have. So why are these better? Number one, this shock body is just a straight aluminum tube with threading at this end on the outside and threading at this end on the inside. This is a fully machined shock body, okay, including the area where the seals go, and I say seals as in plural. This shock absorber has a anodized blue fitting that screws in and holds one seal. No spacers, no other bushings. That's it. Just one X-shaped seal. And that means that there's a lot more potential for this shock to rock. In other words, especially when you're at the bottom end, the shock is far more likely to push against one side of the shock wall and rub hard against that wall, creating friction and reducing the ability for this shock to break motion. Okay, that is not good. If you have, as in the case of mine, several spacers where you're getting that shock off the base, it's less likely to be an issue because you've got the bushing here holding the shock shaft, and you've got the piston almost a centimeter away from that base holding the shock shaft. So that's keeps it from getting a big angle going. But if I didn't have those spacers in here, if I was running this for off-road and that shock piston was going all the way to the bottom, when it's at the bottom, this has the ability to rock, and that's not good. So the TLR shock body has the internal space for a seal, a hard plastic bushing that's at least 3 millimeters, 2.5 millimeters, and another seal, and then the end cap. So you've got two plastic parts separated by a seal that are providing a hold, as it were, for that shock shaft. Plus you have the internal hole at the end here that the shock rod passes through. So that's 3 hard points separated by 2 seals. That is a tremendous amount of structure around that shock shaft, keeping it from potentially rocking. Okay? That's a huge difference right there. The fact that this piece here is part of the shock body and not a screwed in fitting makes it a lot easier to work on the shock, because when I need to tighten this cap, or if I need to loosen it at some point, I am not undoing a fitting if this doesn't want to release. In that one, it can. Also, you have a lot more threading for the shock cap. These shock caps only have a few threads inside them, maybe 3 or 4 revolutions tops of shock, the shock body into this cap. Okay, and my concern was that this has a lot of resistance. It's got it's got an O-ring in it, and if there's dirt on it and I'm trying to make a preload adjustment, that I could unscrew this cap, that this could be so tight that when I go to add preload, I could unscrew the cap and dump my shock fluid, and that would mean that I would have to remove the shock, rebuild the shock, and that's a lot of time lost, especially if you're making a change, in between heats. I actually assembled these with Loctite to make sure that they would not come out. I also used blue Loctite on these blue fittings here that screw in, so that when I tried to remove this little black cap, I didn't take the blue fitting with it, which is exactly what happened the first time I tried to take these shocks apart. Also, the wrenches that they provide, because these pieces are so small, I mean, look at this, the blue fitting, its wrenchable surfaces are only about a millimeter and a half in height. That's not a lot to grab onto. You're likely to strip it, and the tools are of such a soft plastic that it is impossible to get these things tight without just spinning the wrench on the fittings, versus Losey's wrenches right here are big and they're heavy plastic. You can really grab a hold of things, and this is for the shock cap. You're going to get that shock cap on tight. The shock caps are a single piece. They're not a round fitting with a plastic insert. Just many things about this shock is cheap. That doesn't mean it isn't a decent shock. That doesn't mean you can't get it to perform well for you. Other thing, these shock boots down here, or not boots, the shock bases, are not the stock ones. I took those off because these are a standard 12 millimeter big bore spring, and the shock base that they provided was so low in tolerance that the springs popped over the base during a little, bump. And so all of a sudden my car is running at a 15-degree angle because one of the rears has no preload in it, and the spring cap is up inside the spring, and the wheels are rubbing against the inside of the body, and it was just it was ridiculous. I actually managed to drive out the heat like that, but it was crap. So these are either low-C or associated. I forget which. I've got a bunch of them in different sizes in a box. And I swapped out the Proline ones for a low-C or associated spring cup. And problem solved. But that's just, another thing about those Proline shocks that's just not up to par. And it's not on the level of these, which cost less. So, if you don't like low-C, it's up to you, do what you want. But these are great shocks. I've had the same type of low-C shocks for years with the TLR 22 and other 22s, and they're a fantastic shock absorber. So there's just no denying this is better, period. So I'm going to be building up these shocks. I'm going to be figuring out my spacers to get as much droop as much sit down as I can get within reason. I am probably at my max springs, at least for the rear. Let's see, the rear shocks, I am running the TLR 10 short course truck green springs that are a 3.6 pound, and the cups are associated. They're medium cups, the shock cups I was talking about, and I was running 32.5 fluid. On my front end, I'm running the TLR hard blue 5-pound springs, which are going to be fine. I don't think I have anything heavier than a 3.6 for the rear. I'm going to see what I got in my boxes. I may try ordering something at some point if I don't have something heavier than that. And again, 32.5 rear. So I'm definitely jumping up in the shock fluid. That's going to provide a lot more damping. And it's probably a good thing because I was running these hard springs on that fairly light fluid, and I was getting a lot of sudden change. If I tried to dodge left and right real fast, the car would shift heavily from one side to the other. This is why you want to use the blank setup sheets, and you need to do it like it's a religion, because you have so much information to work with, and you can look back and see what you were doing and then analyze how the car was handling and then figure out what direction to move. So I am going to start with assembling shock absorbers. So I'm going to set the suspension parts aside, and I'm going to get to building these. And now that, since I have my rears and fronts handy, I can check on my, how much the bushings were limiting my throw, so I can compare these as I'm assembling them
and make changes by adding more or less spacers as needed at the time. So that's handy as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these springs because I'm going to need them for the other one. I'm not going to disassemble these. All I need from these is to be able to take those measurements of max extension and max compression, and then compare that with these. I want to try to make the car at least a 1/4 inch shorter, if I can, or make the shocks a 1/4 inch shorter. That will, because the shocks are angled, that will make the car maybe a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch lower. Right now, the lowest ride height I was able to get with this was 19 millimeters in the front, 23 millimeters in the rear. And that's kind of high for the rear. And that's probably one of the reasons I was getting so much droop and whatnot, is that I've got more length in the rear, more travel in the rear than I really want. So those things are gonna change, and I will go over all of this with you as I go through this. I've done shock build videos for you, so I'll just do this off camera. If there's anything interesting to show you, I'll let you in on it, but it's basically the same process. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel.